There's a United States territory where housing is so cheap that a one-bedroom apartment costs less than a gym membership in Manhattan. Another place will literally give you land if you promise to build something and stay for 5 years. And one island chain is so forgotten that the last census taker had to use a kayak to count residents because roads do not connect the inhabited areas. Most Americans think territories are just Puerto Rico, maybe the U.S. Virgin Islands if they watch travel shows. But scattered across 2 oceans are actual American possessions so obscure, so economically collapsed, and so desperate for warm bodies that living costs approach theoretical zero. These are places where your biggest monthly expense might be satellite internet, because fiber optic cables have not reached your zip code yet, and probably never will. We are breaking down 13 United States territories where cost of living is so low it breaks conventional real estate logic. Some offer free land with conditions. Others have housing markets, so depressed you could buy a home for the price of a used Honda. And one place technically has zero rent because the concept of landlords never quite made it to their economic system. Subscribe right now because one day you will want to disappear. Some of the IRS takes 6 months to find you. And this video is basically your relocation manual with actual data instead of tropical fantasies. Let us count them down. Number 13, Jarvis Island. Jarvis is so remote that calling it forgotten is generous. It is a coral island about halfway between Hawaii and the Cook Islands, covering 2 square miles of mostly nothing. The current population is 0 humans and approximately 1 million seabirds who have claimed the entire island as their bathroom. The United States claimed it in 1858 for guano mining, which is exactly as glamorous as it sounds. Miners showed up, scraped bird droppings for fertilizer, and left when the supply ran out. Now it is a national wildlife refuge closed to public access. If you could somehow get permission to land there, which you cannot, housing would cost nothing because housing does not exist. You would be camping on coral rock, while seabirds scream overhead 24 hours a day. There is no fresh water anywhere on the island. It barely rises above sea level. One biologist who visited on a research permit said Jarvis redefines desolation. There is nothing but coral, scrub, and birds. Landing requires perfect conditions because waves crash directly onto the reef. They stayed 3 days and left grateful because another day might have broken them psychologically. In reality, Jarvis represents theoretical free living where the cost is 0 because civilization never arrived and never will. But you cannot go there, and even if you could, the island would reject human habitation within 48 hours through sheer environmental hostility. Picture yourself on a coral atoll. Rent is 0 because the concept of rent does not apply to uninhabited wildlife refuges. Your neighbors are 1 million seabirds. Your entertainment is watching waves. Your grocery store is whatever fish you catch. And your exit strategy is hoping the Coast Guard remembers you exist. Number 12, Kingman Reef. Kingman sits about 1,000 miles south of Hawaii and consists of a triangular reef surrounding a lagoon. Most of the reef is underwater at high tide, making it one of the smallest U.S. territories by land area, basically just a few acres when the tide cooperates. The population is 0. There are no structures, no services, and no reason anyone would live there except to prove a point about isolation tolerance. The United States claimed it in 1860, and it became a naval defensive sea area during World War II. Now it is a national wildlife refuge where the only visitors are marine researchers studying pristine reef ecosystems. The appeal theoretically is that if you could access Kingman, which legally you cannot, your cost of living would be nothing because there is nothing to cost anything. You would need to bring literally everything required for survival because the reef provides only salt water and coral. One research team spent 2 weeks on a vessel anchored at Kingman studying the lagoon. They described it as one of the healthiest reef systems remaining on Earth because humans have never lived there long enough to destroy it. But they also made clear that even anchoring safely requires perfect weather because the reef tears boats apart in rough seas. The catch is obvious. Kingman is closed to civilians. Access requires federal permits for legitimate scientific research. And even with permission, you are not living there. You are surviving temporarily while counting down hours until extraction. In short, Kingman represents the extreme where housing costs 0, because housing is a concept that cannot exist on a submerged reef. Your rent is free. Your chances of staying alive for more than a week are not great. Number 11, Palmyra Atoll Cooperative Housing. Palmyra is one of the most isolated atolls in the Pacific, about 1,000 miles south of Hawaii. Privately owned but managed as a wildlife refuge. Unlike Jarvis or Kingman, Palmyra actually has structures and a rotating population of 4 to 25 researchers at any time. If you're a marine biologist or ecologist, research positions occasionally open that include free housing and food. You live in basic dormitory-style buildings, share communal meals, and work on conservation projects in one of the most pristine marine environments left. For researchers, housing and food costs are zero as part of position. You pay nothing for accommodation or meals during your contract, which typically lasts weeks to months. The catch is you must be professionally qualified. Positions are competitive, and you accept total isolation where your only human contact is the dozen other people on station. There is no internet for personal use, no phone service, and no leaving until your scheduled extraction. One scientist who spent 4 months researching sharks said Palmyra was career-defining and psychologically brutal. Housing was free, but freedom was not. You worked, ate, slept, and repeated the cycle with the same people in the same small area until departure. By month 3, small personality traits became major irritations. In reality, Palmyra offers free housing for qualified researchers willing to trade isolation and social monotony for scientific opportunity and zero living costs. This is not relocation. It is temporary survival where rent is eliminated because you are too far from civilization for rent to matter. Number 10, American Samoa Communal Land Living. American Samoa is the only U.S. territory south of the equator, with about 55,000 people spread across volcanic islands 2,600 miles from Hawaii. What makes it fascinating economically is that 90% of land is commonly owned under the FAA Samoa system. You cannot buy land the way you would in the mainland United States. Instead, land use is granted by families through complex social relationships. If you marry into a Samoan family, establish deep community ties, or contribute significantly to village life, you can be granted use rights to land where construction costs become your only expense. Building a basic house runs $30,000 to $60,000 depending on materials. Once built, your monthly costs can drop below $400 if you live simply, fish for food, and participate in village life. The catch is you're not just moving to cheap tropical housing. You are being adopted into a cultural system with obligations. Village meetings last hours and attendance is expected. Family events require financial contributions you did not budget for. Chiefs hold real authority, and your autonomy matters less than community harmony. Someone who integrated into village life said their housing cost almost nothing, but their time was no longer theirs. They attended every community function, contributed to ceremonies, and learned that saying no carried social consequences that affected their standing. They saved thousands on rent, but spent differently on obligations that never appeared on a budget spreadsheet. In short, American Samoa offers nearly free housing if you fully commit to FAA Samoa. Your rent approaches zero, but your life belongs partially to the community, which is either appealing or terrifying depending on your tolerance for collectivism. Number 9, Northern Mariana Islands post-typhoon properties. The Northern Mariana Islands, particularly Saipan, Tinian, and Rota, are closer to Asia than America, with about 57,000 residents. The economy struggled after the garment industry collapsed and tourism declined. Then Super Typhoon U2 hit in 2018, damaging thousands of structures. Now you can find properties at absurdly low prices because owners lack funds to repair them or abandon them entirely when relocating. Homes that would cost $300,000 in good condition sell for $50,000 to $80,000 as fixer-uppers. Rent for livable units runs $700 to $1,200 monthly, far below comparable island destinations. The cost of living is about 25% above the mainland because everything ships in, but housing costs compensate dramatically. The job market is limited to tourism, teaching, and government work. Power is expensive because electricity comes from imported diesel fuel. Water can be rationed during dry periods, and you are in Typhoon Alley, so every summer becomes an exercise in storm preparedness. One teacher who relocated said their rent was $800 for an apartment that would cost $2,500 in California. They save over $20,000 yearly on housing alone. But they also experience power outages weekly, internet that barely functions, and genuine fear every typhoon season when storms approach with nothing between them and open Pacific. In reality, the Northern Mariana Islands offer cheap housing because the economy is depressed and natural disasters keep prices low. You can live affordably, but you accept infrastructure challenges and weather risks that most Americans avoid. Number 8. U.S. Virgin Islands Act 60 benefits. The U.S. Virgin Islands will not hand you free housing, but Act 60 tax incentives can reduce your effective living costs so dramatically that housing becomes almost irrelevant financially. The territory includes St. Thomas, St. John, and St. Croix with about 105,000 residents. If you relocate and qualify for Act 60, you can pay as little as 4% income tax on certain income, instead of federal rates reaching 37%. For someone earning $200,000 annually, that is a potential $60,000 in annual tax savings. Suddenly rent at $2,500 monthly feels cheap because you are keeping an extra $5,000 every month. Median home prices run around $350,000. Rent ranges from $1,500 to $3,000 monthly, depending on the island and the property. The cost of living is about 26% above the mainland, but tax savings subsidize everything if you meet bona fide residency requirements and maintain physical presence as required by law. The IRS watches this closely. You must actually live there, not just claim residence while spending most of your time in New York. One entrepreneur who relocated under Act 60 said the math is absurd. They pay more for groceries and rent than they did in Florida, but they keep tens of thousands extra annually. Their effective housing cost after tax savings is nearly zero. The weather is perfect year-round, beaches are incredible, and they are essentially getting paid to live in the Caribbean. The catch is hurricane season. Storms hit hard and often. Infrastructure took years to recover from Maria in 2017. Insurance is expensive, and every June through November you are watching weather with obsessive intensity. In short, the U.S. Virgin Islands offer strategically cheap living through tax structures that make housing affordable if you qualify and accept hurricane risks as part of the deal. Number 7. Guam Military Contractor Housing. Guam is America's strategic Pacific anchor with about 170,000 people and a massive military presence. If you work as a defense contractor on Guam, housing is often provided free, or your compensation includes allowances that completely cover rent. Military personnel receive government housing at no cost. Contractors typically get housing stipends of $2,000 to $3,000 monthly that match or exceed local rent, meaning your accommodation is effectively free while you bank your salary. Median home prices for civilians are around $400,000. Civilian rent ranges from $1,500 to $2,500 monthly. But if you are military or a contractor, housing costs disappear from your budget entirely. The cost of living is about 24% above the mainland. But when housing is covered, that premium becomes manageable. The job market is heavily military, tourism, and supporting industries. If you fit those sectors, you can live rent-free while earning mainland or better wages, saving money at rates impossible stateside. The catch is you are 6,000 miles from the mainland. Typhoons are regular. Traffic is absurd for an island 30 miles long because there is one main road and everyone uses it. And brown tree snakes are everywhere, an invasive species that destroy native bird populations and appear in places snakes should never be. One contractor described Guam as the best financial decision and the most isolating. Housing was covered, so they saved $30,000 in a year. But they had not seen family in 14 months, spent 90 minutes daily in traffic driving 10 miles, and had a snake fall into their shower, which remains their go-to story for why they will never return. In reality, Guam offers free housing in the right employment sectors, but you commit to isolated island life where daily existence revolves around military schedules and infrastructure. Number 6. Wake Island Contractor Positions. Wake is a coral atoll 2,300 miles west of Hawaii, famous for World War II battles, and now serving as an emergency airstrip with a population of about 100 contractors and military personnel. If you get a contractor position on Wake, housing and meals are provided completely free as part of compensation. You live in dormitory-style housing, eat in a communal cafeteria, and work long shifts. But housing and food cost you nothing, meaning your salary is entirely bankable. Positions typically pay $50,000 to $80,000 for 6-month to 1-year contracts. With zero expenses because there is literally nothing to buy on the island, you can save your entire paycheck. People finish contracts with $40,000 to $60,000 saved, money that would take years to accumulate stateside. The catch is total isolation. Wake is a coral atoll with a runway, some buildings, and nothing else. No town, no entertainment, no variety. Your days are work, gym, beach, meals, sleep, repeat. If you need external stimulation to function, Wake will psychologically break you by month 8. One person who worked a year said it was financially transformative and mentally devastating. They saved $55,000 because housing and food were free and there was nothing to spend money on. But by month 10, they had watched every available movie twice, knew everyone's life story, and felt time dissolve into routines where weeks vanished. They left with a full bank account and mild PTSD from monotony. In short, Wake offers completely free housing and food with bankable salaries, but you trade a year of your life for isolation that tests human psychological limits. Number 5. Midway Atoll Federal Positions. Midway sits at the edge of the Hawaiian archipelago, about 1,300 miles from Honolulu, famous for the World War II battle, and now operating as a wildlife refuge. Fewer than 60 people live there, mostly U.S. Fish and Wildlife employees and contractors maintaining the refuge. Positions are rare, but include housing and meals as part of federal employment. You live in government housing, eat in communal dining, and work maintaining one of the most remote refuges in the Pacific. Housing and food costs are zero. Salaries follow federal pay scales, typically $40,000 to $70,000, depending on the position. Contracts last months to years. The population is tiny, meaning everyone knows everyone, and social dynamics become intensely important because there is no escape from personality conflicts. The job market is non-existent outside refuge operations. One worker who spent 18 months said Midway was incredible for history and brutal for mental health. Housing was fine. Food was adequate. But the social scene was 50 people recycling the same conversations for months. They walked battlefields where thousands died, which was powerful, but they also experienced cabin fever. So severe it became a medical concern. And there are albatrosses everywhere, hundreds of thousands of them, nesting, calling, beautiful and also loud and messy. Your existence becomes albatross adjacent. In reality, Midway offers free housing through rare federal positions requiring isolation tolerance most humans do not possess. Your rent is zero, but your sanity is negotiable. Number 4. Puerto Rico Rural Rebuilding Programs. Puerto Rico has 3.2 million residents, but after Hurricane Maria in 2017, rural areas depopulated as people fled to the mainland. Now, certain municipalities offer incredibly cheap or free land to people willing to relocate, build, and stay. Some towns in the mountainous interior provide land at no cost if you commit to constructing a home and residing there for a minimum period, typically 5 years. Other areas have abandoned properties available for almost nothing or through sweat equity arrangements. You can find structurally sound homes under $40,000 in recovering areas. The cost of living is about 5% higher than the mainland for goods, but housing can approach free if you are strategic. The appeal is tropical U.S. territory living where you are a full citizen, with incredible weather, rich culture, and the satisfaction of helping communities rebuild. The challenge is infrastructure. Power outages are frequent and prolonged. In rural areas, electricity can be out for weeks. Internet is unreliable, making remote work difficult. You learn rainwater collection, generator maintenance, and cooking on gas when the grid fails, which it does regularly. One remote worker relocated to the interior for property that cost $25,000. They have mountain views, perfect weather, and neighbors grateful they are contributing. But power goes out constantly. They work from their car using hotspot when their backup generator runs out of fuel, because the gas station also has no power. In reality, Puerto Rico offers nearly free housing in rural areas if you help rebuild and accept that infrastructure is still recovering, which shapes every single daily decision. Number 3. Serranilla Bank Future Claims. Serranilla Bank is a reef in the Caribbean between Jamaica and Nicaragua, claimed by the United States but disputed by multiple nations including Colombia, Honduras, and Nicaragua. It is mostly submerged with few coral rocks above water during low tide. There are no permanent structures and no population. The United States maintains a lighthouse on a small platform, serviced occasionally by the Coast Guard. If sovereignty were ever clearly established and settlement allowed, which is highly unlikely, you could theoretically claim land where costs are zero because no economy exists. The reef covers about 200 square miles, mostly underwater. The few exposed rocks total less than 1 acre of actual land. There is no fresh water, no vegetation, and no shelter. Even if you could legally settle there, which you absolutely cannot, survival will be impossible without constant resupply. One Coast Guard team that serviced a lighthouse at Serranilla is beautiful from the water and completely hostile to human presence. Waves crash constantly. There's nowhere to land safely. The exposed rocks are baked by sun with zero shade. They stayed a few hours for maintenance and left immediately. In reality, Serranilla represents theoretical free land that is meaningless because it is a submerged reef legally disputed and environmentally uninhabitable. Your housing cost is zero, but housing cannot exist on coral that disappears at high tide. Number 2, Bajo Nuevo Bank. Bajo Nuevo is another disputed Caribbean reef claimed by the United States, but also by Colombia, Jamaica, and Nicaragua. Like Serranilla, it is mostly underwater with tiny coral rocks occasionally visible. The United States maintains a lighthouse on a platform. There is no population, no structures beyond that light, and no legal way for civilians to settle even if they wanted to. The reef is about 90 miles long, but offers less than 1 acre of exposed land at low tide. If you could somehow claim it, cost would be zero, because nothing exists to cost anything. But you would also die relatively quickly because there is no fresh water, no food, and no shelter from sun or storms. The strategic value is maritime claims. Possessing Bajo Nuevo gives a claimant access to surrounding waters for fishing and potential resource extraction. But for actual human habitation, it has less than zero value. One sailor who anchored nearby described it as a beautiful navigational hazard. The water is stunning, the reef is thriving with marine life, and the idea of living there is insane because you would be camping on coral rock in open ocean with no protection from weather and no resources. In short, Bajo Nuevo offers theoretical free housing because housing is impossible. It is a reef claimed for strategic reasons where the cost of living is zero because living itself is not an option. Number 1, Swains Island family-controlled land. Swains Island takes the top spot because it is an actual inhabited U.S. territory where housing costs can approach zero if you are connected to the right family, and nobody knows it exists. Swains is a coral atoll in American Samoa with a population between 15 and 20 people. Almost all members of the Jennings family, who have controlled the island since the 1800s. The island is privately owned but politically part of American Samoa. If you marry into the family or are granted permission to live there, housing costs nothing because the family controls all land and structures. There is no real estate market, no rent in conventional sense, and no economy beyond subsistence. The island covers about 1 square mile. There are a few buildings, a church, some houses, and that is it. Power comes from generators. Water is collected from rain. Supplies arrive every few months by boat. There is no internet, no phone service, and no economy. You fish, you farm coconuts, you maintain structures, and you exist in one of the most isolated communities under U.S. jurisdiction. One researcher who visited said Swains feels like stepping into the 1800s. The family was welcoming but made clear that life there is hard. There's no backup plan if you get sick. Supplies run out between boats. Social dynamics are intense because you are living with the same 15 people constantly. Privacy does not exist. But housing is free because the concept of paying rent never developed on an island controlled by one family for over a century. The catch is you cannot just move there. The family controls access completely. You need an invitation, and even then, you are committing to subsistence living where modern conveniences are mostly absent. In reality, Swains offers the cheapest housing in any U.S. territory because a family-controlled land system eliminates rent entirely. But you are joining a tiny, isolated community where your life is defined by the ocean, the family, and the supply boat schedule. Picture yourself on Swains. Housing costs nothing. Your neighbors are 15 people who all know each other. You wake to ocean sounds, fish for meals, and live simply. Then you realize your nearest hospital is hundreds of miles away by boat. The supply ship is delayed by weather, and you have had the same conversation with the same people every day for 3 months. Sometimes free housing costs everything except money. So there you have 13 forgotten U.S. territories where living costs range from low to theoretically zero. Like this video if you just learn America owns islands where rent is free because landlords never evolved. Would you take free housing on a remote territory if it meant isolation and questionable infrastructure? Drop your answer below because we just cover places most Americans will never visit, and a few where even visiting is legally impossible.